doing the healing work, and you meet Justin. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, he was pretty fresh out of recovery when we met. He had been, or out of treatment, excuse me. He had been to treatment for the first time in 2020, and we met in the fall of 2020 and got together in November, and immediately got pretty serious. Like within a month, he had already moved in, and we were saying, I love you. And, it was on. And I mean, within 2 months, he was like, I want to marry you. And anyway, we're not officially engaged, but he asks me all the time. And so moving into 2021, he still had a lot that he needed to work through with his own recovery. He went to a really harsh place his first time. And it's all more his story to tell, but he did relapse in 2021 and had a lot of processes around that before he got to recovery. And I was so strong in my practices, but I had someone living here with me now. And so everything had to readjust, and I hadn't really stepped into readjusting, and I didn't even realize that I really needed to. And I ended up losing myself, which is what can happen when you love someone that has issues that they're recovering from. And so that is very much a challenge. And that's one of the things that I wanted to address from my own lived experience today, is how imperative it is to take care of yourself in those situations, because it can become all about that other person. And I essentially lost myself. I mean, I gained like 30 pounds from eating to cope. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. It was kind of gradual. And I still haven't lost it. And I'm trying to get better about that now, but I just had to recognize I eat to cope. And I had to, it's just such a funny story. I wore this necklace that said goddess on it for like years. And I was really stepping into my goddess phase, and getting him to treatment was really, really difficult, even though he wanted to go. And we recorded a podcast about it. People can go back and listen to. I recorded this about me coming home even and how difficult it was. And I came home after getting him there, which was a nightmare. I come home, I look in the mirror where I do all my self-love every day, and I'm not making this up. My goddess necklace broke at that second. It just broke. And I was like, well, that's about right. Yeah. I know.
Wow. I was like, kind of felt like a sign.
Oh, it was. Oh, 100%. And I was like, yes, I've lost myself. And so I really was like, okay, how do I find myself again? And part of that was just giving myself space. But part of it too was this asking for help, because so many times it becomes about that other person, and everyone goes, how is he doing? How is so-and-so doing? Whether it's your child or your partner or your parent, your friend, they want to know how they're doing. And instead, if you have someone that that's going through that, you can say, how are you doing?
Right.
Because it's very hard on that person, and they've probably lost themselves, and they're probably so sick of talking about that other person. I know I was so tired of my entire life being about someone else. And yes, you have to accept it to a certain extent, especially if it's your child, but no, your life is your own. It is about you. You're the main character. So you have to shift back to that mindset. And I realized that, and my goddess necklace broke. I have it hanging on a bulletin board upstairs in my bathroom, and it just makes me laugh because it reminds me of losing myself and coming back to myself and giving myself grace around that. And it's been a process since then. I mean, he went to treatment and really showed up for the work, and he's continually stepped up every time for his own growth. And him learning to love himself is a huge part of that, and me learning to love myself. And then us being able to come together and maybe recognize when the other person isn't doing it, and listen to the other person and say, have you done this today? I can't tell you how many times we stand in front of that mirror and I say, have you told yourself I love you? And he's like, no. Have you? And I'm like, well, yeah, yesterday. But anyway, but we tune in together, and we make it a practice together to tell ourselves that I love you. And I'll say, I love you, Amy, and recognizing that that is important. And I don't know how strongly I'm teaching that to my kids. I hope I am. They definitely know I do all these things, and I do encourage them to love themselves. And I think it's just going to come with time, but modeling that is really important. And along this path, I've embraced my own sobriety. I thought life is handing me this opportunity to truly live with fun, with everything in a sober space without, adding any substances in. So why am I not embracing it? So almost a year ago, I decided to give it a shot and treat it as kind of an experiment almost, to say, how am I going to feel? And my mood is much more balanced. And having a partner that's doing that already makes it easier.
Right.
So why not? And what am I modeling to my children? What am I showing them? That's a big part of everything I do. Having 2 girls, I just want to say, okay, what am I showing them really? Am I showing them I need a drink at night to have fun, or to be with them, or to relax, or to play a game? No, that's not. And that was during the pandemic too. My daughter was about 14 or 15, and she said, oh, you need to have a drink, I see. And then I was like, oh, wow. So I didn't really drink during the pandemic much. Maybe if I was out with friends, but not at home, because I didn't want her to think that I needed that to be around her. And then what's she going to think? Oh, that's what you do? So I cut it out. And it was surprisingly got pretty easy, because they're not drinking,
Right.
So there's something in there, I think, about paying attention to what life is handing you and not trying to force it to be any other way. I'm not trying to force it right now to go out to happy hours all the time. Instead I'm like, okay, life's handing me an opportunity to be sober. So am I going to embrace it, or am I going to reject it? And life is handing me these other opportunities. So I'm like, okay. So you're going to say okay to it? People are hearing this right now. You're hearing this right now. So life is handing you perhaps an opportunity to step into more of a space of self-love. Maybe it is,
Right.
maybe it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So when we had talked about this, realized that I had so many people on the show that have talked about, being an addict, what that's like, that I haven't ever had anybody talk about what it's like being on the other side of that.
Yeah.
When you fiercely love someone who's struggling with alcoholism.
Yeah.
What do you do when they relapse? How does that affect you? And clearly it does, and you just thank you for being so honest with, your journey with that. And what are the steps that you take to actively be a part of that journey together and individually?
Yeah.
So when he relapsed, what did that look for you? What resources did you have to go and find and do in order to support yourself first and foremost, and then also to support him as well?
I think our natural tendency can be to want to fix it, want to help. What can I do? What can I do? The good news / bad news, however you want to look at it, is there's nothing you can do.
Well, because we're not human doers. We're human beings.
Right.
And the only thing we can do is be.
Yeah. And that situation is out of your control, period. And that is tough. I had to learn that the hard way. I've tried to control it, to fix it. What else can I do to manipulate this situation, to control this situation, to help him, to fix it? There's literally nothing. I had to just completely surrender and say, he's on his own path, and I'm going to be okay no matter what. And that is tough, especially if, it's your child. I don't want to imagine that. But, you have to step into this space of trust that you're going to be okay no matter what. And I would say also to people, really pay attention to how your body is feeling, because you can meditate all day long and you still may not have your fight or flight calmed down. Your nervous system is super strong, and it is going to manifest trauma, because you are experiencing trauma. And there was a time when I felt like I was going to, like I could not get my blood pressure to calm down. And my neck felt like it was going to explode. And I couldn't get it to calm down. And I thought, wow, my mental state and my spirit are good. I am taking care of myself. I feel okay. I know I'm surrendering. I know I'm allowing this, but my body's not getting the memo. And so I had to really take stock of that and say to him, hey, I can't do this again because physically it's too taxing. And so I'm going to have to take myself out of the situation unless, we're able to resolve it right away and you're honest about it right away. And so we've been able to talk about that, and he understood that. I think that's probably a hard thing for a lot of people to hear. And so maybe it's not something that you can say right away, but I just want people to note how their body's feeling. And if you're in fight or flight, and if you cannot get your body to calm down, no matter sobriety, meditation, prayer, body work, energy work, I don't know, all the things, that is not abnormal. Pay attention to it and know that that's your body telling you something, and you need to take care of yourself and perhaps get out of that situation. And that's a tough thing to do too. It's scary. That's going to trigger you into fight or flight even more. But you're listening to yourself and taking care of yourself and doing what's right for yourself. And using your voice to help yourself and ultimately loving yourself. And that's where I got to. And you know what? There we are at that paradox again. He ends up stepping up, really listening. And that's what they teach us in Al-Anon, is that when you step back and stop trying to control everything, that's when things just start to get better.
Yeah. And so Al-Anon is another one of your resources.
100%.
Okay.
I started going, I don't know, a year and a half ago, something like that. And when he went to treatment, and that's been an incredible resource for me. Even just going is completely worth it. There's tons of online ones too. It's for anyone that's affected by addiction. And it's ultimately putting yourself back in control of your own life and not trying to fix everything around you. Which as perfectionists or as people pleasers or as moms, women, that is a tendency, at least for me. And so finding that space of stepping out of that tendency is challenging, but ultimately benefits everything. Because you know what? Those people can take care of their own lives. I mean, granted, with children, we do have to do certain things, right? But adults, which most everybody that we're talking about is, then they have the capacity to do it. They have to choose. And when we stop trying to help and stop trying to control, that's when it happens. And that's when we tune into ourselves, make ourselves the priority. It's all just a practice and a learning for me too. But, the serenity prayer, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah. The serenity to, anyway, I'm blanking out on it, but and that has been an incredible resource for me. I have a sponsor now, and I work the 12 steps in Al-Anon, which are the same as the AA 12 steps. And it's been instrumental in me taking care of myself in the best way possible.
That's so powerful. It's so interesting because just a couple of days ago, I was listening to one of my songs I put when I was pregnant with Liam. I put together this playlist.
Yeah.
And one of the songs on there was Fix You by Coldplay. I Will Try to Fix You.
Yeah.
And I had this moment the other day when that song was playing, and I was like, we can't fix anyone.
You're like, is this the codependency anthem?
I'm like, wow, we can't fix people. We can't be human doers. The only thing we can do is listen and be there for them. And I think a lot of times, and it made me think back to when I was really in the depths of struggling with my depression and anxiety and PTSD and all the things. I could sense that even from people around me, in a kind way, they want to help fix you.
Give you some advice and some tactics.
Or, just make it all go away because it's uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable for them too.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm saying that with so much love. It's so hard when people on the other side are dealing with it, because it's going to naturally bring up things in you that you have to deal with. And I think that's what's brilliant about Al-Anon.
Yeah.
In fact, we had Dr. Drew Pinsky on quite some time ago. And I asked him that very thing. I was like, what can we do for people? He's like, 100% hands down, go to Al-Anon. It is free.
Wow.
It is the best resource out there. Go, go, go. I mean, I think he said it at least 4 or 5 times on that.
Wow. I feel very validated.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
You should from him.
I mean, it really does, because it turns it around and lets you look at yourself.
Right.
And you ask, what's my role in this? Which is a tough question sometimes, right? And then that's not in a victim blaming way or anything like that. But, there are times when I could have spoken up better. And there are times that I let my boundaries slide. And so there's a lot of wonderful things that we can learn in there that help us get stronger all the time. So I couldn't agree more. It's just been wonderful for me. Yeah. And I still go. And I'm in a space right now where things are pretty good. And the other day I thought, I should really go. It's like wellness care, And I thought, I don't want to wait until something has gone awry or something is making me feel, I don't want to say making me feel bad, that I'm in a space of feeling bad. And so I went ahead and went, and I'm glad I did. I feel like it's always worth it, and you're always going to learn something. You're always going to hear something, and it's a great space, like I was talking about before, to really drop judgments. And I think another maybe piece of advice is that if you are someone that's going through it with someone you love, people are going to want to give you unsolicited advice and tell you, oh, you need to kick them out. You need to do this and this. Unless you've been through it, the person may not understand. And when I spoke to my sponsor, she said, don't talk to your friends about this. They're not going to get it. So finding resources of people that have been through it and understand it is a completely different thing. And so when you can find those people that understand and are not going to say, oh, get offended for you, get pissed off, and then, then what, you make a choice that they don't agree with, and they end up judging your choice. They end up judging that person you're with, or your child, or your spouse, or your husband, or whatever. And that's a tough thing to navigate. So I guess I don't want to say necessarily watch who you share things with, but it's a matter of choosing someone who has the experience and the self-love and the ability to drop judgment and understand an addiction space or a mental health space, that they can say, this is a disease. And I get that. I see it now in a totally different way, and I'm not going to judge anybody's choices around it. That's right. Because I don't know what's really happened. And I do know that these things are a disease.
They are.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, addiction does come down to mental health most of the time, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And then it becomes an actual disease. I've seen it. I've gained a compassion for it that I never knew I would have. Where I was like, wow, this really is a disease, and so finding people that can support you in that space is imperative, because if you're seeking out or you're just speaking to someone who is ready to fix it all for you or tell you what to do, or this is the right thing, but that's more challenging, because it just gets complicated. You've got kids involved, all these things. So,
no one wants to relapse. No one wants to feel that people are suffering.
Yeah.
And when they have to go to that place where they're grabbing that bottle, where they're grabbing this after they've been sober, it's from a place of true pain that other people may not understand.
Yeah. And it's so hard to not want to, it's so hard to stifle that urge to fix it, help,
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. Like, why
you have everything going
would you
for
do
you.
that? Yes.
I
You have
mean,
all the resources. You have
yeah.
all the means. You have all this. That doesn't mean that's going to fix things.
And you have to pay attention to the lesson that you're getting in that moment, which is you have to surrender. We don't have control over this life. We are being shown what we're supposed to be shown in that moment. So how can I strengthen my own boundaries? How can I strengthen my own practices? How can I love myself through this? How can I, put that first, me, my children, and my life first? So that's ultimately, what are you being shown in this moment? And if you know somebody going through some things, I would say try to come from it from a space of true compassion and drop any judgments. I have some friends that I was able to talk to, and they dropped all judgments, and that felt so good. And I mean, I have an appreciation and gratitude toward one friend in particular that I'm thinking of, and she was just like, I'm just so happy that things are going well, and just means it,
Right.
and is still accepting of our relationship, accepting of anything. And I think we all know what it's like when you like if someone doesn't like the person you're dating, or something, and you decide to stay with them, right? And then it alienates that relationship. So where can we find those spaces to drop? So if you know somebody going through that, maybe you can maybe it's an invitation for you to drop judgments, right?
Right. So it sounds like, if we can find the friends who we know are going to drop judgments, then that might be a safe space for you to have a community.
Yeah.
And
or maybe you
ones
don't
that-
have any friends like that. So go to Al-Anon and you'll make a friend.
Yeah,
I've
and-
talked to people I don't even know and confessed. I can think one thing I told someone that I haven't seen her since I met her that day. She said something that resonated with me. I shared something with her. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Yeah.
No, it's so,
I told her
it's
in
so
deep
true.
dark.
No, and that's what I was going to say. And Al-Anon, and I totally agree with you. You will end up sharing things that you would never expect that you would share. I mean, I mostly went to AA and I went to a few Al-Anons, but the thing about those rooms is that it helps you not feel so alone in this journey when you're going through it, because you will pick up on bits and pieces of what other people are talking about, and it just hits you right here. You're like, yes, that's me. Yes, that's me. Yes, that's me.
Absolutely. And not only that, I had one instance where something happened and it seemed huge to me. And I felt like I could not tell one single one of my friends. They would be, turned on their head over it. So I would go to Al-Anon. I am in a terrible state. And I go and I spoke it. I didn't speak it to the entire group, but afterward I told a couple of people that came up to me and were like, thank you for sharing, because I cried. And it seemed so big walking into that room. After I said it, it was like letting the air out of a balloon. Yeah. It was like, suddenly it just didn't have the weight it did. And suddenly the rest of the day I was like, why did I think that was so big? You know what? It's okay now. And I was astonished. Sometimes finding the right space to voice something, and maybe it's in a Speak as One community, maybe it's in a meeting, finding the right space to actually say it just takes the air out of it.
It does. It really does.
Yeah. That's what I like about your title, Speak as One, is that it really does. It just takes the weight out of it when we can speak it out and speak our truth. And suddenly
it doesn't have that control over you. It's like it's been this little monkey on your back, right?
Yeah.
Saying this little thing all day long. You're like, and then when you speak it, there's no more voice.
Right. Especially when you're in a non-judgmental space and finding people to talk to that just get it. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the great things about Al-Anon too is that there's no crosstalk. No, you can talk and no one's going to be like, here's some ideas for that. It's just you talk, the next person talks about their thing. And there's no crosstalk and there's no recommending outside resources. Like, oh, we should listen to this podcast or none of that. And that is actually refreshing as hell because, sometimes you're going to want that. Maybe you go to therapy and you want the give and take, but it's also really nice to just be able to say whatever. And that's that. Then you're like, oh, okay, well, that was easy. I get nervous still talking in a meeting every single time. I get nervous. I can feel it welling up and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to say something. And then I do it and I'm like, it's okay. I don't have to make perfect sense. Yeah. It doesn't have to flow exactly right. I don't have to worry about everybody understanding.
It took me so long to speak up in a meeting, like months.
Me too.
And I just remember I went to this little pink house. And so I was able to walk there from where I was living. And I just would walk there and felt just shame. Like I can still remember what it feels like to have that feeling of heaviness, just like with my head down and like where my life had turned into, just and getting there and not wanting to speak and then trying to run out. I'm like, no, don't talk to me.
Yeah.
And then, finally, it's like the first time being able to say something, then it makes it a little bit easier. And then,
Yeah, I would encourage people to speak if they go,
oh,
it's really
absolutely.
hard.
It is.
But it's the right place for it.
It is. And everyone in there, they're just as it. I mean, I don't want to say everyone, but it just does feel like a space that there's no, and I even felt that going in there. I'm like, I don't feel judgment from these people. Why is it so hard for me to talk? But I just, like you, and this can be another conversation, I had totally lost my voice.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything. I didn't think I could speak. So it was also, there was a lot more going on. It had nothing to do with the people in the room. And if you want to speak, that is the place to speak because they're going to love you.
Yes, I totally get it too. Because I am forthcoming on Instagram, on my podcast. I talk about all sorts of stuff. I'll talk about, pleasure practices and glass dildos, whatever. You can cut that out if you want. And, and I'll talk about all this stuff. But then I get in there and I'm like, I get really nervous and tongue-tied, and it's just a funny phenomenon.
It is.
So anyway, the more I do it, though, it's like exercising a muscle. It's a practice like everything else. The easier it gets.
That's great. And so you and Justin now have been able to, you've been able to set healthy boundaries. You have things in place to take care of yourself. Yeah. He has things in place to take care of himself, and y'all have been able to kind of work through that particular moment.
Yes, and it's a process too. Like, we're going to have ups and downs, and that's okay.
One day at a time.
One day at a time, yeah. And we're getting a lot better at listening to each other and being kind in those moments and understanding that they happen. And it's a process, but it feels really healthy. And I guess then in hindsight, you look back and you say, wow, I'm actually grateful that all this happened because it taught me so much, because our relationship is so much better, because this is what intimacy is with another person, opening up and being vulnerable in those spaces. It's surprising, but that's what I desired. And what you desire can come about in the most unusual and unexpected ways. But I desired a truly intimate and deep relationship. And this is how it's coming about. So be careful what you wish for, but if you really want that, sometimes it's going to come about. If you really want a close relationship with someone, sometimes it's going to mean that everything gets pushed out. So are you going to be open to that and allow it? And it's a wild thing how those things can happen, but I'm getting what I wanted. And so am I able to look back and say, wow, you know what? I'm able to look at that without judgment and not say it's good or bad. The other day, we got invited to a conference where Justin spoke at, and it was really insanely cool. An amazing group of people that are all in a growth mindset, put together by Jimmy Rex. It's called We Are the They movement. And we went to Salt Lake City, and I got asked to speak to their evolving women's group. And I was like, this is perfect. This is so great. This is aligned with everything I'm doing and the space I want to move into. And so he and I sat down for lunch one day during the conference, and I said, how'd you meet Jimmy again? How'd he come into our lives or into your life? And he said, oh, I met him on that ayahuasca ceremony. And that was what kicked off his relapse. And I look back on that as a tough time, and like, I have a lot of judgments around that time and how I handled it, how he handled it, the things that went on. And I just started hysterically laughing. He said, after that, I went dark, and Jimmy kept pursuing me and kept coming up and was like, I want to be on your podcast. I want you to speak, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we never know what's going to happen with a certain situation. We can look at a situation as like, this is the worst thing that could happen. And then 2 years later, it's opening doors and opportunities for you. So, I just laughed. I was like, I looked at him and he laughed too. And I was like, this is so wild. Never judge these things because we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to evolve out of it. We don't know if it's bringing about our best relationship ever. We don't know if it's bringing us closer to our kids. So why are you hearing these things? What is presenting in your life? Can we just show up for it without judgment? And these are all, I feel a little high talking about this because it's like, it's just a magic. And are we willing to accept that?
Yeah. And when you ask, like what you were saying, when you are, be careful what you wish for or ask for. It's true. And I remember one time I was really struggling with patience in my life. And so someone was like, pray around that, I was just having a conversation with someone. And they said to me, but be ready to be tested.
Yeah.
Because the moment you call that in to your life, if that's what you really need to work on, you will be tested in order to grow that muscle and that strength to become a more patient person. And I'm like, wow, is that tested?
That's why I laughed when you said that. I'm like, oh, here it comes, right?
Here it comes.
Yeah. I mean, be ready because life is going to be like, do you really mean it? Okay, here's lessons in that. Here you go. You want to learn this? Here you go. Yeah. And you're like, wait, what? Did I want to learn this? My voice teacher laughs about in church. I guess sometimes they do this Forge Me by Fire, Lord song or something. She's like, I won't sing it anymore because every time I sing it, I am forged by fire. And I'm like, right. The words that we say have power. So if we can just go ahead and say, I am patient, maybe then we are moving into that space without saying, teach me patience, because then you're going to get some lessons that perhaps were unexpected. Perhaps we wouldn't choose, right? Like someone relapsing, and then you have to delve into your self-love space. It's like, you really want to learn self-love, or can you just go ahead and step into that space right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us at Speak as One, and I want to thank Amy Edwards for being here. We will have all of her information listed below, so please go to our YouTube channel at Speak as One. Our website has all of our information, which is speakasone.com. And as always, we can share these stories if you can help us like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.